right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, you can't see me right now, but there are white doves just flying in the background of me and everything's in slow motion. That's right, we are talking about John Woo and his new film, Silent Night, his first American film in 20 years, I believe. Excited to get into this one. And joining me for it is Brian Skutle, returning to the podcast from Sonic Cinema. We got a lot of great puzzle pieces to get into, but before we get into the conversation, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. So, aside from that, it is the end of the year and there's a lot of stuff on the way, a lot of episodes, but you can find any of the episodes I've already recorded over on our Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, which is another movie podcast I produce, and from my music career, which I am releasing a whole lot of new music in 2024. You can find some of it right now on the Patreon, but check it out, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. I appreciate you all just being out there listening, but if you want to support the show in that way and get access to all this great stuff in advance, check it out. So with that said, let's get into our conversation about Silent Night. All right, we've got Brian Skutle with us to talk about Silent Night. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, David.
Absolutely. I am looking forward to this one. This should be, I don't know, this movie is going to be an interesting one to get into. I think, obviously we've got the return of John Woo to an American film for, after so many years, but also we have like such a very specific kind of action movie that this thing is. It should be really interesting to get into this. We should start off, like, before we get to puzzle pieces, tell me, are you a huge John Woo fan?
John Woo has been one of my favorite filmmakers for 20 plus years.
Nice.
My first film of his I saw was Broken Arrow,
Mm-hmm.
and that basically I enjoyed that one so much. I basically started to watch his films. I watched Hard Target after that, and then I started to get into his Hong Kong work. And then by the time Face Off came out, I was just absolutely sold on his work. And he's somebody who, whenever I go back to revisit something, whether it's The Killer, whether it's Hard Boiled, whether it's Face Off, or even something like Wind Talkers, it's always a pleasure to go back and watch his work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I got to admit, I haven't seen any of his movies in years, but I used to love them so much. Like back when I was in high school, I used to watch
Mhm.
all of his movies, not just the American ones, but yeah, going back to Hard Boiled and The Killer and all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted in the lead up to Silent Night to like make some time. But as we were talking before we hit record here, the end of the year is just an insane time for movies when you're covering them on
Yeah.
podcasts or a critic or whatnot. But so yeah, I did not have time, but I look forward to a John Woo marathon in my near future because some of these movies they hold up so well and they're so much fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I do want to take this moment to say that really do want to see whatever legalese needs to happen to get his Hong Kong work on 4K on Blu-ray. I
Oh yeah.
really want it to happen because of the fact that is criminal that those films are out of circulation when it comes to physical media. I mean,
Yeah.
I still have DVDs of a good number of them. I was relieved when his last Hurrah of Chivalry came out from Criterion earlier this year because I'm like, ooh, does this mean we're going to start to see some like The Killer and Hard Boiled get released this year and what was going on? But yeah, I know he said in an interview recently that because he doesn't own the rights to those films, it's just kind of a legal quagmire to get them
Yeah.
out on physical media, and it's really a shame.
That is a shame, and yeah, I don't know, but it's got to happen at some point. There's got to be so many different parties involved who want to see it happen.
Hmm.
Enough of a clamor. I think we'll finally see it, but yeah, it's got to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into Silent Night. This is a movie that, at the time of recording, it's just come out and it's not exactly blowing up the box office, but to put it lightly. But
Yeah.
I think I was a little mixed on it myself. I think that the silent protagonist thing, which is kind of the main crux of the story here, is done really well. I think Joel Kinnaman is great, and I think he carries it. I also think Kid Cudi, who is kind of a second silent protagonist, even though we maybe didn't realize that going in, is also really good. I think that there's a lot of fun to be had here.
I definitely agree with you, and it's like I definitely understand. I mean, look, this came out the weekend after Thanksgiving, which is traditionally a not a busy one at the box
Hmm.
office. I mean, as somebody who's worked in the theater industry for 20 plus years, I can say it's typically not a busy one, usually because that's when people are shopping, and also because if you're a college football fan, that's when the big championship games are. But it's really a shame that this one is getting forgotten as much as it is, because this should be an event. It should be like, it's like you said, it's John Woo's first film for an American studio in 20 plus years.
Yeah.
It's from the producers of John Wick. That should be something to get people excited about.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing is, it's like I do understand why people may not register with it, because of the fact that it's a lot darker of a movie than we're usually associated with Woo. I mean, even
Sure.
if you go back to The Killer and Hard Boiled, those films, as violent as they get, as bloody as they get, they also work well within the tone of like action movies, American action movies of the time. This
Yeah.
one is very, very dark, and I do think that's intentional on Woo's part, because I do feel like this is a movie of him. He's almost reckoning with his own legacy, I think, in a long way, to a certain extent in this movie, especially when it comes to the excessive violence and the way that was so influential to American filmmakers and just in general. I mean, I remember there was an interview with him in the lead up to Silent Night coming out where he said something along the lines of, he remembered this one act of violence that occurred, and one of the perpetrators said that they were inspired by John Woo movies, and
Mm.
that left an impression on him. And the thing that and I think one of the things that you see in the earlier work of Woo's is he is somebody who really doesn't he uses flair when it comes to shooting action films, but you get the impression that there is a moral weight to violence. I mean, you look
Sure.
at moments in Hard Boiled, you look at moments in Face Off, and that's definitely the case. And so I think Silent Night, in it's funny, there were so many reviewers who came out like, oh, it's not the same thing as Woo's earlier work and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, it's not. And I actually, that's part of the reason I like it, because of the fact.
Hmm.
Now, I don't love it partially because of that, but I like it because of the fact that I feel like it's him doing something much different and way deeper than what he's done in the past when it comes to action.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, you can't expect somebody to keep making the same thing over and over again. And
Hmm.
yeah, an artist like that grows and does something a little bit different. And so we're either along for the ride or we're not. But with that said, let's start getting into some puzzle pieces. What do you have for your first one?
I mean, there are some really there I'll admit it's like there were times where this was tough to
Yeah.
come up with puzzle pieces for because it's like there are some obvious ones that you can make. I mean, you can make John Woo movies, you can do this and that. I mean, I guess the first one I want to go with though is actually a John Woo movie, but it does tie in with what I think he's doing in Silent Night, and that is Face Off,
Hmm.
his 1997 movie with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. And the reason I make that comparison is I feel like the character of Brian, the Joel Kinnaman character, and you're right, he's absolutely phenomenal in this movie. He very much reminds me of Sean Archer.
Hmm.
He's a character who the loss of his son has just completely wrecked him
Yeah.
in a way where it's his his driving principle is all about vengeance. It's all
Yeah.
about vengeance of getting payback to the against Castor Troy. And in Brian, I think you definitely get that in this film. The difference is Sean Archer still has a wife, still has a daughter that can hold him back to where he's not completely isolated. Whereas Brian eventually loses his wife because she feels as more important for her to move on emotionally and to try to grieve rationally than to just follow the single-minded sense of vengeance that he has.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Yeah, this guy really kind of goes overboard a little
Yeah.
bit in wanting that vengeance. And you used the V word, the vengeance word, so I'm just going to jump right on top with my first puzzle piece, which is the Batman, the latest version of the Batman with Robert Pattinson, directed by Matt Reeves, where it's all about this guy who's just hell bent on vengeance. And basically turns our protagonist into kind of a monster that stalks all of the bad guys. And
Mhm.
he is kind of just a crazy person. And that was kind of what I think most people loved about the Batman. And yeah, maybe the action is a little spaced out here in Silent Night, but
Mhm.
you are getting the same kind of a protagonist, a guy who is just a nightmare for all of the villains and all of the bad guy characters.
And the thing I mean that's actually I'll admit that's one that I didn't even think about, but it does make perfect sense when it comes to that version of Batman. And
Hmm.
one of the it does but it does get to something that I do really like about this movie is that, one of the things that's interesting about Batman is that he doesn't have superpowers. His
Hmm.
his superpowers is having all of this spectacular wealth to where he's basically able to finance all of this.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing I like about Brian is that he's just a regular guy. He's not somebody who was a former military soldier who's got to get back in the game or a former, CIA agent or FBI person or somebody, like Liam Neeson's character in Taken was.
Sure.
Uh, he's just a regular guy who's just overwhelmed with profound grief about what happened to his son. And I love that he really has to work to get himself in physical shape to make this vengeance happen.
Yeah,
And
sure.
even when he does, as it starts, he's still not completely going this isn't going to be a cakewalk for him. And that's
No.
one of the things that I like about the Batman, and that's one of the things I like about the Batman Begins with Bale, because of the fact that it's very much that's the type of Bruce Wayne that is really interesting, is the one who really has to work physically to do what he's trying to do. And I do think Brian is of the same ilk of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's one scene earlier in the movie that I was thinking about, like later on, once we find out that this guy, because it kind of does the whole back and forth thing. And we find out that this guy, like you said, he's not like a former CIA agent or anything. He's just some guy whose kid was killed, and causes him on this to go on this revenge thing. But there's a scene in the early in the movie when we don't know that yet, and we just see that he's uh, attacking these gang members who are having a shootout, and he whacks a car with like I don't even know what it was, like a bat or something. He just went,
Yeah.
but just thinking back to that opening scene when we don't know that he's just some nobody, like to think that just some random guy would even think to do that in that
Hmm.
moment, like he's just scrambling for like just some form of like getting them back, and he just doesn't even know what he's doing. That's like an insane moment, and I like that about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say that's one of the things I think that's one of the things that is most interesting about this film is that this is a character who's solely being driven by his emotions and
Yes, yes.
by rage and by vengeance. And it's like, when we first see him in that opening sequence, like we haven't seen what happens to where chasing he's chasing these guys down. We haven't seen that yet. We know based on the trailers and stuff like that, we have an idea, but we haven't actually seen that moment yet. And that is one of the things I love about this movie is um the way John Woo gives us as much information about life before this tragedy at moments where it feels most important to the plot to find that out. And I
Hmm.
really love that structure in this film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it works really well here. So, question: was Batman Begins one of your puzzle pieces, or
It
were you
was
just going
not.
off?
It was
Okay,
not. The reason I brought it up was because of the fact that I think that's another example of Bruce Wayne being treated as a regular
sure.
guy who has to really work to be a fighter, and it really does tie into it. So
Perfect, perfect. Well, what do you got next then?
So going with that elliptical structure of, flashbacks, flash forwards, and stuff like that, we are going to go to a Christopher Nolan film though, and go with Memento. And it's
Hmm.
another one with vengeance as a fundamental idea. And the vengeance obviously Leonard is trying for the death of his is over the death of his wife, but the reason I bring up Memento is obviously that structure does feel like I mean, obviously it doesn't continuously go back and forth between flashbacks and flash forwards like Memento does, but especially at first 30, 45 minutes or so, the way Wu structures the film to give us the information that we need at a moment where it's important for us emotionally to get that information, I think really is something that could be tied into Memento and that
Yeah.
type of structure that Nolan did in that film.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, it's a guy who's basically destroyed himself over
Yeah.
all of this grief and desire for revenge. So, yeah, I think that's a great one to include. Definitely. Um, I will go with for my next one. So we were just talking about how this guy is not an ex-soldier or CIA agent or anything like that. But I'm going to go the opposite end of the spectrum here and go with Rambo: Last Blood, the most recent Rambo movie, as a puzzle piece. Rambo in this one, he's living in peace at a farm until this young girl he knows is kidnapped by a Mexican cartel, and then Rambo, pretty much wordless, although it's not a fully wordless role, just goes and picks off everybody and just kills the
Hmm.
entire gang, the entire cartel. Um, First of all, you've got that whole setup, which is fairly similar to what we're going with Silent Night. But I know one of the big criticisms of Silent Night is the kind of right wing nightmare of the whole situation. Just this kind of white knight coming in and just
Yeah.
killing an entire gang of Mexican gang members, and yeah, it's there. We can't really exactly get around that, but it's a scary gang. What do you want? This is what action movies are built around.
Right. I mean, I think it's like I understand where people are coming from with that. I know when I was watching the movie, I hadn't read anybody else's review of it when I watched it opening night, and I'm like, ooh, yeah, okay, I kind of see where some of these complaints might be coming from, but at the same time, I mean, I don't the thing I think that is important about this though is that, to your point, it's not, you know, I don't think the race of the this particular game means anything to this character. I don't
Sure.
think it's intentionally like I don't think it's intentionally blowing that dog whistle.
Right. I think everything is just so politicized right now that we all kind of see that
Oh
lens,
yeah,
even if it's not there. You know.
absolutely, and I completely understand that. And I mean, I understand if it makes people uncomfortable because yeah, it should. But at the same time, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's where Wu's thinking is. He's going back to like 80s action movies, where 80s and 90s action movies where that type of thing was just normal. I mean,
Right.
that was
Right.
that was that was just normal business as usual. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually haven't seen Last Blood, but that's actually really interesting. Even though I know it's not supposed to be a good movie, it almost makes me curious to finally check it out to see how I feel about that.
As a fan of ultra violence, the violence was great. But
Well,
otherwise, it's not very good. But yeah, what do you have for your next piece?
so I'm actually, I mean, there are a few that I could go with here. I mean, I've got a number that I could go with here. I'm going to transition from Stallone in your choice to Stallone in a different choice, and that is Rocky 4. Now, before,
Okay.
and really, you could apply this to the entire Rocky franchise, at least the original one. But the reason I picked 4 in particular is that that one was where the training montage was basically the absolute, like, as much of a co-star in that movie as Dolph Lundgren or Talia
Yeah.
Shire was.
Yeah.
The use of music, the use of silent actions as he's building his character up, and you definitely see that in Brian's character, and the really quite phenomenal score by Marco Beltrami, which I was listening to earlier today, and I absolutely loved it. Um, but yeah, I mean that's kind of where my thinking was when it comes to Rocky 4.
Yeah, that's a really great one because this movie is basically like a one long training montage. Like, whenever it's not the action in the beginning or the end, it's just him getting ready to, kill people,
And
basically.
again, in a way, it's about vengeance because
Yeah.
that's what Rocky is after in that end fight.
Absolutely. Not to go on like a total super tangent, but you were just talking about the score here. This movie is such melodrama, and I was just thinking about the score in May December, which everybody is talking about. Is that movie is it melodrama camp? Like where does that go? But this movie is such melodrama. Basically, that's I even wrote in
Yeah.
my Letterboxd review that instead of making a holiday action comedy, this is a holiday action melodrama.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where this score goes.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, if especially in his Hong Kong work, if you look at the Better Tomorrow movies, you look at The Killer, you look at Hard Boiled, melodrama is a huge part of what drives those movies, and that's part of why I think Face Off works so brilliantly is because of the fact that it is taking Wu's penchant for melodrama and just ladling on this insane high concept action movie above it. And you
Yeah.
have to be dealing in melodrama to get that. And I mean, I think, and we'll get into it with another puzzle piece I have later. Um, I think especially with the silent aspect of this movie. melodrama is basically where you're going to be living in because of the fact that you're
Sure.
not reliant on dialogue readings. You're not reliant on exposition or dialogue in the traditional sense. So if you're going to be playing with melodrama and if you're going to be using silence as a huge part of the way you tell your story, melodrama is invariably going to be a big part of it.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I will go for my next piece. So, friend of the show, Joe Black, told me that I should watch this movie and use it as a puzzle piece here, and I'm gonna. It's a movie called Evelyn from Joe Lynch, starring Selma Hayek, and I think there's plenty of connections you can make here. You know, this person who is wronged and left for dead, and then makes her revenge against the entire gang that that took everything from her, and lots of violence, and it all takes place on Christmas. You know, certainly there's comparisons that could be made, even though she's not a silent protagonist. But the main reason I still wanted to include it, aside from the fact that I bothered to watch it just out of nowhere in my busy December, is that if the biggest criticism people have of Silent Night is that there's not enough action, that it's too spaced out, Joe Lynch gives us all the action we could possibly want in this movie, Evelyn. And it's still about the same. It's about the exact same thing. I gave both movies 3 stars on Letterboxd. Both fun movies, both flawed. Both have some great action, but having more of it doesn't necessarily make it, the exactly everything that we wanted out of it. Have you
Okay.
ever seen Evelyn?
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
No. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun, and Salma Hayek's great. I mean, she's just having a blast, just shooting lots of people and stabbing and all that stuff. So,
Okay. All right.
yeah, it's worth watching. What do you got for your next one?
Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the ideas that I was putting out there last time, and I'm going to go with silent film drama. I'm going to go with dramas from the silent era. And the reason is obviously because of the no dialogue concept, although that's not exactly true. I mean, there are ways that Wu gets around having not having expositional dialogue in this movie. There
Hmm.
are ways he gets around it, but but this film is so much based around looks, about the way the characters look, the way it really does put Wu in a position where his filmmaking is the most important character in the entire movie, because if he's not able to tell this story without dialogue in a way that engages us, then it's going to fail. And
Hmm.
I think he does that very well, and it does bring to mind the filmmakers of the silent era.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why silent film drama doesn't really hold up quite as much as silent horror or silent comedy is because of the fact that it's that theatricality that the actors had to do in order to convey the story.
Right.
And
Right.
I will say one of the things that I think is interesting about this movie is that, with few exceptions, there's not a lot of theatricality to the performances in this movie.
Hmm.
I think they're all relatively natural, which is which is not how another filmmaker would have gone. It's another one of the reasons why I really respect the way John Woo approaches it. And yeah, I mean, so I think you look at this film, you go back to, I've talked about the 80s, I've talked about Woo's own legacy. I think, but I think you, to a certain extent, with this concept of no dialogue, you do have to go back to the silent era and how people told stories back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the big scores, big performances. And I do think Kinnaman is going pretty big here, even though it's maybe not as big as some of the stuff that you would have seen
Oh,
back in the
absolutely.
day. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's still a pretty big performance.
But I
So
mean,
yeah.
especially, I'm thinking in particular with the scenes between him and his wife. Like,
Hmm.
in a lesser director would have made those so much more heightened and exaggerated in terms of directed them in a way that was so much more heightened and exaggerated than Wu does. And I think that's one of
Sure.
the great strengths of this film is the fact that Wu pulls back on that. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there are absolutely moments where Kinnaman is just completely over the top in this movie, but it really fits to where his character is in the moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Definitely. We talked about Stallone earlier. I'm not going to do another Stallone movie, but I am going to do a movie that is a reboot of a Stallone movie. I'm going with Dredd, the 2012 version of Judge Dredd. Basically, once we get to the final, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes of this movie, where it's pretty much nonstop action from then out, our lead character Joel Kinnaman has to climb a whole lot of stairs and kill a whole lot of people on his way up. Very much like in Dread, where it all takes place in one big tower, and there's a lot of stairs climbing and a lot of shooting around corners of winding stairs and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely thought of Dread there.
I haven't seen that one in a long time, so yeah, I do remember liking it. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, I was. This isn't a official puzzle piece, but of course, I was also thinking of the staircase scene in John Wick Chapter 4 from earlier this year too. I mean,
Sure, sure.
obviously, it's from the same producer, but no, I mean that actually makes a lot of sense. And it, I would also say for that scene in particular, there's some of the moments in the hospital when Hard Boiled
Hmm.
where you have memories of the way Wu shot that. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the moment that sequence in particular is really the moment where John Woo's theatricality, his use of slow motion in action scenes is more pronounced than it
Sure.
has been throughout pretty much any other part of the movie.
No, absolutely. That's when he's given the fans what they were, there for, basically. So,
Yeah.
what do you got next?
So, I'm going to go. This is one of the first things that I thought of when I was watching the movie. And, you know, a lot of people would necessarily go with Death Wish, the Charlie Bronson film, but I am going to go more directly with James Wan's Death Sentence,
Yeah.
starring Kevin Bacon. And the reason that I'm going with Death Sentence is because I feel like these two films are very much of a piece in the way they show how meeting violence with violence is a path towards destruction for the main
Yes.
characters.
Yeah.
And I mean, apart from the fact that Death Sentence is a terrific movie, um, and it's a really underrated film in James Wan's career, uh, but the fact that the because of the way they approach violence makes them bleaker and not as much fun action as I think audiences want.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the reason why both of them have kind of been met with the fates that they have, which is a shame because Death Sentence and Silent Night are I movies I think are both really terrific and part of and probably underrated parts of the filmmakers' filmographies.
Yeah, absolutely. I had it on my list as well. I agree with everything you just said there. It's great, and it's just the violence against violence ends in destruction. Like that is kind of the main thing of both of these movies. So, yeah, definitely agree there. So I only have one more piece, and it's kind of a little one. I probably shouldn't have ended on it, but we are talking about a movie where not much is said in Silent Night. There's been a bunch of them lately. Earlier this year, even we had No One Will Save You. But I'm going with A Quiet Place,
Mhm.
specifically because if you remember, there was like a meme that went around a few years ago, kind of making fun of the fact that they had like a whiteboard in their bunker. and they circled on it, what are their weaknesses
Hmm.
about the aliens? And here Joel Kinnaman has a calendar, and he's written on the calendar, "Get answers," and circled it like 3 times. And so that's just totally reminded me of that. So
That's a
just a
good one,
little
and also
observation.
both scored by Marco Beltrami.
There you
Um,
go. Big scores.
uh,
Yeah.
no, I mean, Quiet Place is a really good, puzzle piece, I think, because of the fact that it is dealing with again, you're having to convey narrative, you're having to convey emotions through silence, and I mean, that is something that is always interesting to see filmmakers approach it. Now, I mean, A Quiet Place, isn't entirely silent. It's not completely devoid of dialogue like Silent Night is. But no, I mean, I think that's an interesting. I think that's a good one. Um, so there are a few others that I did want to mention. I mean, we've talked a little bit about John Wick. I mean, that's an easy one because it's a vengeance, and it's also produced from the same producer did John
Sure.
Wick. Then you can look at other John Woo films like Bullet in the Head and apparently Hero Shed No Tears. Another one of his Hong Kong films is something that people thought about when it comes to this one. Um, we haven't talked about holiday themed action movies,
That's
but I'm
true.
not going to
Yeah.
mention Die Hard, but I am going to mention Lethal Weapon. And the
Yeah.
reason I go with Lethal Weapon instead is because I think, especially with the character of Riggs, I think he's driven by a lot of that same emotions that Brian Kinnaman has, and that
Hmm.
sense of self destruction. And I think that's part of the reason why I think this is as much of more of a kinship with that movie than Die Hard. But then I did
Yeah.
also want to bring up one more thing, and it again, it's a little one as well. It is Alfred Molina at the end of Boogie Nights, and the reason I bring that up is the main gangster, who I think is nicknamed Playa, if I
Playa.
remember
Yep.
correctly. He's basically just he's just walking around his joint with a Santa jacket on, and it's as crazy, psychotic, chaotic a performance as I think Alfred Molina is in Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
And
He's
so
great.
that I have to think that something like that was bouncing around in John Woo's head when he came up with that.
He also reminded me a little of Tuco in Breaking Bad. Just super animated like that. But yeah, that's a great pull right there. I love that. And yeah, that character's great. Also, shout out to his girlfriend who just is out of control.
Oh,
Like,
good
just
God. I
completely
mean, that's when you
insane.
know that, that's, and that part of the movie is when John Woo is starting to let off the bleakness and a bit and just go bug nuts with
Yes.
the film in general, with the action in general. And there are moments like that that are just really crazy. Um
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny with some of our last puzzle pieces. I'll read down our list here in a second, but some of our last ones, I brought up A Quiet Place. Then you went to John Wick, as obviously it's the same producers, and then a couple of John Woo movies, and then a couple of holiday theme movies. I think like the pitch are those pieces right there. It's like we got the silentness of A Quiet Place, we got John Wick action, we got John Woo action, and we got it's a holiday movie. So it's like
Yeah.
I think we nailed it right there. But all of our puzzle pieces we just talked about, we included Face Off, The Batman and Batman Begins, Memento, Rambo Last Blood, Rocky IV, Evelyn, silent films, Dread, Death Sentence, A Quiet Place, John Wick, Bullet in the Head, and Hero Shed No Tears, Lethal Weapon, and throw Die Hard in there, and Boogie Nights, and throw Breaking Bad in there as well. Whole bunch of stuff all over the place. One other thing I was thinking about, and maybe this even happens in some of these movies we've already talked about, but I was trying to think about that Kid Cudi detective character who I really like that he's also silent, although they don't even really feel the need to bring attention to that. He just simply doesn't have dialogue.
Yeah.
But there's that whole, it's almost a trope really of like the detective and the vigilante who both want the same thing, but they're technically on other sides of the law, and they
Yeah.
kind of knowingly help each other out, even though they're against each other. So that's a whole other thing. You could probably throw a couple more pieces in for that. But
Oh, no doubt.
any other closing thoughts? Anything we didn't quite get to while doing puzzle pieces?
See, I don't think so. I do agree with you about Kid Cudi, and I think his and I did kind of feel like his character is the one, because of the no dialogue aspect. I think his is the one that gets the shortest end of the stick. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody else basically works fairly well within the no dialogue, but I think because of the fact that you see that there's obviously an investment in what Brian is doing. It would have been probably nice to see his character fleshed out a little bit more, I
Mm-hmm.
think, before that ending and before the climax really starts to hit, to really cement a bond. If But at the same time, I'm not sure that necessarily John Woo's going for that, because one of the reasons he gets in the game in the way he does at the end is the care package that Brian leaves him, which basically gives off the impression that Brian is like, look, I'm doing your job because you're
Mm-hmm.
not doing your job. And I mean, I think to have, I actually kind of like the fact that they're not necessarily buddies in the same way that some of Wu's other protagonists get to be buddies, but you do kind of see that Cootie's character is I think you definitely see that he's empathetic towards uh what Brian is going through, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He feels for him and he wants to help out, but he's also, doesn't want to help someone who's just murdering people in in cold blood vengeance. So, yeah, that's a tough spot to be in, I think. But
Yeah.
I think that does it for Silent Night. Brian, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
So I'm actually going to go a little bit further. I'm not going to do a recent one because I'll
Mm-hmm.
admit I've been a bit slow as far as getting to some recent ones. I'm actually going to do a an older one that I think was worth watching, especially if you're a fan of John Woo. And I think, I didn't mention it as a puzzle piece because it doesn't really work for this particular film. But I know it's a film that John Woo really loves. He actually presented a re-release of it in the States 2 decades ago. Was Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Cercle Rouge, a 1970 crime heist thriller. And I know Woo is a big fan of Melville's work and has really been influenced. And I actually did watch Le Cercle Rouge recently. It actually shortly before seeing Silent Night. I really quite loved it, and it's a heist movie as well as it. You, it's if you're a fan of Heat, if you're a fan of some of the like dual hero villain character pieces, and even something like The Killer, something like Face Off, you kind of see the same influence.
Mm-hmm.
I would check it out, and there is a an extended heist sequence in that movie where no dialogue is is said, that I think you can kind of see Wu getting the idea of, oh well, this can work. And
Right.
so I mean, I don't think it's available on streaming anywhere other than just to rent or buy, but it's well worth renting or buying.
Right on, right on. Yeah, it sounds great. I'm gonna have to check that one out. Great recommendation, Brian. Where can people find you and your podcast?
www.sonic-cinema.com is the main place you can find me. You can also find the podcast there. The podcast has been a bit slow the past couple months as I've been working towards settling into my new job, but I've got some great episodes coming up. I'm really looking forward to getting to those. You can find the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, Good Pods, and and you can find my music on Bandcamp as well. I actually just released an album of horror-inspired pieces this past October. You can listen to that there and check out my music. But yeah, the main website is www.sonic-cinema.com.
Perfect. Well, Brian, I'm glad we were able to do this one, and hopefully we'll get you back again sometime next year.
Thank you very much.
Do you love rom-coms? Do you wish you could talk about Christmas movies year-round? Then we have the perfect podcast for you, Hallmarkies Podcast. Throughout the year, we cover all things romance, holiday, and Hallmark, including recaps of every Hallmark show, like When Calls the Heart and The Way Home. You can also get loads of bonus content covering shows like Bridgerton, Sweet Magnolias, and Just Like That. We are an all-female group of friends who are passionate for these shows and movies and give our honest opinions as well as gush over what we love so much. But that's not all. Every Monday, there are interviews with all your favorite actors, writers, directors, and more. Check out Hallmarkies Podcast on all your podcast providers and on YouTube. That's Hallmarkies Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Silent Night. Thank you to Brian Skutle for joining me on that one, and thank you to you for listening. I hope you're enjoying piecing it together. I've been doing a lot of episodes lately. It's, it's a lot of work, and the end of the year always gets to be really packed in with movies to watch, notes to take, and then podcasts to make. So if you're out there listening, I do thank you, and make sure you're subscribed because there's lots more on the way. Also, if you're enjoying the show, you can maybe give me a little Christmas gift by dropping me a little 5-star rating and review on Good Pods or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, wherever it is you're listening. I would appreciate that a lot. You could also join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And you could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod on all the socials. We do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content for Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. Lots of great stuff over there. You can check that out at patreon.com/bydavidrosen. And of course, I'm just happy to have you all out there listening. But if you want to support the show in that way, it is very much appreciated. And with that said, let's close this out with a piece of music. And I don't think I have a Christmas song specifically, but screw it. Let's play a Hannukah song. This is from my now defunct Jewish comedy rap group, Fakakta. I've probably played this on the show before. It's a song called the Hannukah Song, aka Spin the Dreidel. So I hope you enjoy it. It's totally ridiculous. I'll play some of my real music on the next episode, I'm sure. But hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
This is a Hannukah song, won't be too long. Gonna party for 8 days. Arteries so clogged, cause we drink eggnog with our latkes and we say,
it's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah song. It's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah song.
Oh Hannukah, come light the menorah. Let's have a party, we'll all dance a horror. Gather around the table, we'll give you a treat. You got my balls to play with, I got you to eat.
And while we are playing, the candles are burning low.
It's a Hannukah.
One for each night they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago.
It's a Hannukah.
One for each night they shed a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. Judah Maccabee is the man for me. Made the light burn for 8 days. Gonna get some gelt, gonna make me melt. Spin the dreidel all the way.
It's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah song. It's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah, it's a Hannukah song.
What up, girl? My little Shayna Needle. Hop into my world, I'll fill the hole in your bagel. Spin the dreidel, and if I get Gimmel, you're gonna give me a piece, a lot more than a little. Fiddle with my fiddle, and I'll be a fiddler. After I diddle ya, I'm gonna get rid of ya. I love you, Jewish Dave, is what you'll always be saying. Cause I got down low, and I found a Afrikaner.
This is a Hannukah song, won't be too long. Gonna party for 8 days. Arteries so clogged, cause we drink eggnog with our latkes and we say, Judah Maccabee is the man for me. Made the light burn for 8 days. Gonna get some gelt, gonna make me melt. Spin the dreidel all the way. I love that Judah Maccabee.
It's a
Oh, 'cause he's so sexy.
It's a
It is the best of all nights. 8 days and crazy nights.
It's a
We like to party for 8 days. Spin the thrill away. Spin it.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.